All right, hi everybody. Thanks for showing up. We're doing a presentation on SLR's flood mitigation and hydraulic analysis, doing some studies in Phoenicia. Of course, we've been doing that for many years, and we're trying to make things a little bit better every year, every engineering study. I'll hand it over to Adam or Matt.
Yeah. Hey everyone, so I'm Adam with SLR Consulting, and my colleague Matt Truehart's here. So we're going to work you through the flood hazard mitigation alternatives for Phoenicia. We'll save some time at the end for any questions that anybody might have. But ultimately, the background is that this really came out of the local flood analysis that the town had completed back in 2016. SLR was formerly Milan McBroom at the time, which is why there's the two names there. But from the analysis that was conducted under the LFA, a potential solution that was identified in conjunction with some of the bridges in Phoenicia was this idea of these floodplain benches. And what we'll present on is kind of a series of floodplain benches on both the Stony Cove and the Esopus Creek that work in tandem with one another and kind of build the benefits as you add these components to the project. You can go to the next slide. So this was an original rendering of the concept coming out of the 2016 local flood analysis. It's Bridge Street Bridge looking downstream, and so the upper picture kind of shows what could happen. You know, it involves this reclamation of floodplain, reconnecting into the river so that it does its job to dissipate and reduce flooding on Main Street of Phoenicia and other parts of the hamlet. So the objective of the new study was to reevaluate the LFA recommendations. So anybody who's familiar with the LFA, it's kind of a bigger picture. It doesn't drill down on the individual mitigation solutions to the level of detail that was needed for this follow-up work. And so coming out of the LFA, in addition to work that the county is pursuing on Bridge Street Bridge replacement, there was an opportunity to evaluate these recommendations from the LFA in more detail and really see what host of solutions might be feasible for the hamlet. A couple of notes: all presented flood hazard mitigation alternatives are conceptually or hypothetical at this point. So what that kind of means is we look at the big picture and say, like, what's the maximum benefit that we could get? If we put a floodplain here, what's the reduction that we're going to see on Main Street? It doesn't look at things like underground utilities, septics, and things like that, which would need to be evaluated in more detail if any of these individual combination of projects were advanced in the future. So it is conceptual in nature. One thing that I think everybody in this room probably realizes, but some of the alternatives are complex and really a long time strategy. So setting up the town for a roadmap to flood mitigation in Phoenicia. The modeling itself is complex, but I would just say the hamlet area, and when you look at like the Stony Cove in conjunction with the Esopus, it's a complex site to begin with. You know, you've got the confluence, which is notoriously very dynamic. You've got river flooding from both the Stony Cove and the Esopus Creek that can impact the hamlet. And then you have to evaluate in combination. So do we get coincidental peak in the Stony Cove as well as the Esopus Creek, which kind of would represent the worst case scenario. So both rivers are peaking around the same time. Or is there scenarios where Stony Cove or Esopus peak at different times and what are those potential impacts? So those are some of the things we were able to look at for the modeling. Some alternatives would require either acquisition or removal of existing buildings. You know, any of those type of solutions would certainly require support from willing landowners. So that's an important caveat as we work through the different alternatives. And all projects, like I said, would require advanced design that really will look at the individual impacts of any project or any project that's being implemented in combination with one another. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Matt. We'll kind of get into the modeling aspects that we're going to do.
All right. So these are the floodplain bench options that we looked at along Esopus Creek here, and you might notice that these are fairly similar to what was shown on the previous slide for the recommended floodplains from the LFA, and we've kind of parsed them out a little bit differently here. I'll start with the green one, the downstream north bank or left bank floodplain. There's a few affected parcels existing there. So we kind of separated that one out because it was a significantly lesser magnitude of disturbance than was needed elsewhere. Then on the opposite bank of the right bank, the south bank, that's a much larger floodplain. But what we kind of found is that doing just that, half of it was not very effective in downtown. So that became one larger floodplain, and then there's the confluence floodplain bench on the Stony Cove. So we can get into more details on these. The combination of all of this can improve the hydraulics at the replacement Bridge Street Bridge. It can improve the hydraulics of any of the 5 alternatives that we've assessed for that. If you're familiar, we will get into them a little bit more. But the amount that it improves things for each bridge alternative will vary by bridge alternative, and we will get into that. So this combination with a Bridge Street Bridge that works well with these floodplains can alleviate much of the flooding in downtown Phoenicia that is caused by Sophus Creek. There are several properties that would be disturbed and a few that would require removal of the buildings in order to construct these floodplains. And that will be in these areas shown here. So on the right bank along Station Road, and then the building that overhangs the creek at the southeast corner of the Main Street Bridge it would interfere with the effectiveness of that confluence floodplain at the upstream end, as well as the need to replace the Main Street Bridge with a much larger span to accommodate those floodplains. So as Adam mentioned, a lot of these are complex, and a lot of these alternatives need to work together with others. So I'll just move right up to the Stony Cove here, where we have a few possible floodplain benches. I'll start with the blue one on the left bank or the east bank at the here we go. And that's in the the Simpson Mini Park, and so that would essentially be taking that park and lowering the elevation of it by up to about 6 feet, just to provide that space back to the river at lower levels of flooding. For that to be effective, it would need to carry continuously through the Main Street Bridge, which is impossible with the current Main Street Bridge. So that would require not only that building removal, but also bridge replacement. That is the town property, other than coming through the bridge and the downstream building. On the opposite bank is what we're calling here the J Street floodplain in green. This is much more disruptive to a number of properties. What we're showing here is where there would also be 5 to 6 feet of cut. Again, this would require a longer bridge. And this is, again, there's a number of properties would be impacted here. We did target avoiding any disturbance to be within the footprint of the homes on these properties. And contain the floodplain bench to where there are garages and sheds and I believe a swimming pool as well. So it's not nothing, and those folks would lose most of their backyard as well as any buildings they had back there. But as I'll get to that, is as Adam said, we're looking to get floodwaters off of Main Street. And that's not really doable without that. Farther upstream, we have what we call the Romer Street floodplain, and that mostly on the right bank and west bank. Again, it's disturbance on private property, but does not overlap at all with buildings on that property. And that helps contain floodwaters in the channel farther upstream. So we'll get into a little bit more about what some of these are. Those are just highlighting the main disturbances for these floodplains. And again, these two, what we're calling here the Simpson Mini Park floodplain and the J Street floodplain, the combination of those would facilitate a replacement Main Street bridge that could meet state DOT hydraulic performance standards, as well as alleviate flooding on Main Street. So this is flood depth mapping of the existing conditions 100-year flood. I've got the Bridge Street Bridge and the Main Street Bridge highlighted in white outlines. And one thing that you may notice at both bridges is that floodwaters, you can see the depths here. I'm sorry, I should introduce that. Purple colors are deeper water and the lighter blue colors are shallower. So this goes up to about 25 feet deep upstream of the Bridge Street Bridge. And you can see that when floodwaters hit that bridge, they push around it, causing some floodwaters to go farther out into the floodplain than maybe they otherwise would. And floodwaters leaving Stony Clove Creek above the Main Street Bridge have a tendency to flow either right down J Street or east down Main Street. And we saw this in Tropical Storm Irene in 2011. So I'll just show now that same flood event with both of those bridges removed and not replaced. And this is just purely for demonstration, just to illustrate how much of that flooding in downtown is simply due to the bridges themselves, and nothing else changed. So it's significant, but you can see there is still a fair bit of flooding downtown and elsewhere. So now I'll show that same scenario again with those floodplain benches. And that's in yellow, sort of a crude drawing of where they are. And I can toggle back and forth here, but you can see that this is this next step with this combination of complex and costly projects to construct these floodplain benches. You're now looking at pulling essentially all floodwaters off of Main Street. You do see a little bit up there, and that's actually from floodwaters flowing south in the northbound lane here that are going to get back over the road. So you can imagine it's very shallow flooding. That's not coming up on the sidewalks on Main Street. And realistically, the roadway grading for any sort of Main Street bridge that would span these floodplains, that never works. So there are some significant potential benefits in addition to alleviating flooding at many buildings. Flood depths can be significantly reduced at many of the buildings that would remain floodplain. So now we'll look at the projected future 100-year flood. This is actually a very similar flow to what FEMA uses for their 100-year flood. So this is actually not just significant for future considerations, but this is something to think about now. And it's quite a bit more flooding, and you do see this sort of run around and flows coming down Mount Everett. And I'll just then show that same flood event again with those floodplains, and you can see that the benefits are nearly as significant. So now I will toggle through, if everyone's still on board here, the 4 of the 5, we're not looking alternative 4 for the Bridge Street Bridge replacement, but 4 of the 5 alternative Bridge Street Bridge replacement options with the Esopus Creek floodplains modified only to fit what the bridge expands through these ridges, so with the floodplain enhancements through the Bridge Street Bridge will go hand in hand the Bridge Street Bridge alternative, or what this is all consistent of. And all of these would assume a adequate replacement of the Main Street Bridge, which wouldn't certainly be happening at the same time, but again, looking forward here. So you'll notice with the alternative one bridge, which is the smallest of what we assessed, is that even with those floodplains, you can be just pushing water back onto Main Street and back onto Lower High Street, where you might be able to alleviate that otherwise, as with alternative 2 or 3, which is improvement still, and then alternative 5, which is sort of a smaller span again. You're avoiding putting much water back on Main Street, but flooding back to High Street again. And then it's also important to notice that the depth of flooding on the south side of the business block buildings in Phoenicia is also relevant here. So there's actually quite a big difference between alternative 5 and alternative 3 or 2 as how much mitigation you would have coming from the Sophus Creek business block. So I know that's a lot. I'm going to power through to what we're calling the Romer Street floodplain, which you could not see on these views. And it's a little bit independent in some ways, but does connect to the flooding downtown as well. So this would be a 100-year flood by gauge analysis, which is a lesser magnitude than the FEMA 100-year flood. And then this is what it would look like with those floodplains. So it's a minor improvement, you can alleviate flooding at 4, I believe, maybe 5 properties here, buildings on those properties. But this would really make much more of a difference in, say, what FEMA assessed as the 100-year flood, or any of the projected future discharges. So quite a bit more water spilling out of Stony Cove Creek, and then flowing through the neighborhoods in the north of the hamlet. And then here's that again with that the floodplain benches. So it's I'll point out here that the home on the property that's most affected by that Romer Street floodplain bench is floodplain from currently, and that can be changed with this floodplain bench, and that's an important thing to note as well, that every property that would need to be disturbed to construct any of these would benefit directly from a flood mitigation standpoint. So obviously there could be drawbacks if you're losing your backyard or losing a shed or a garage, but as far as flood depths at your home, that's or reduction. And you'll notice there we were unable to come up with a practical, reasonable alternative to pull this little lobe of floodwaters back into the channel. There's simply no room between Route 214 and the opposite valley wall for anything that we or other stakeholders felt was practical. But you can see that even for what it does elsewhere, it's pretty significant. We were also asked to look at alternatives at the elementary school. So we had a few. There's a couple that are shown here. I'll mention we also model a berm, a floodplain berm, at the northwest corner of the school, around the northwest side, as well as possibly floodproof from the building. These were two other more intensive alternatives on the left. Would be to enlarge the existing drainage swale, side tributary channel on the east side of the road between 214 and elementary school, and construct a much larger bridge or culvert to carry that back down the road, or to relocate the road and construct a floodplain bench. And both will be effective at alleviating flooding of the school. So we have existing conditions on the left, the swell enhancements in the center, and the road relocation and floodplain bench on the right. All of them would alleviate flooding at the school. The floodplain bench could also alleviate flooding of a few more houses, as well as potentially improve resilience of the roadway itself by removing it from the floodplain. Sure, there are questions. That was by design. I know you wanted to get into a lot of this. It's a lot. Hopefully, folks have a chance to read the report or see it. But we were counting on questions. Yes, please.
So the alternative 5, the bridge, street bridge, rebuilding, is higher on the south side than the town side?
Correct. Yes. Right, it will slope the opposite direction. And that is beneficial, but it also is not raised enough. So in some of these, like if I were to show you the 25 flood or much less of magnitude discharge with the alternative 5 bridge, it's going to be okay there because the bridge is touched by floodwaters. And that's really the issue here. Once the bridge is impacted by the floodwaters from the river, it's there's a lot here, and I know we kind of go through this a little bit in the report here, but we talk about some of these as it's calling this and calling that, and it's a lot of makes it easier to reference. As we're kind of saying, you need everything shown there to get that flooding off of the street. Whether or not that's realistic, if you just can't secure permission from a landowner, and that means maybe you have to skip one of these, or maybe it's significantly smaller. It's not a total loss. There are still some major benefits that you have, but that call it the pipe dream of a dry industry, you're not under flood. That would be another question, but maybe if
when you talk about homes, you mentioned sheds, swimming pools down on J Street, and then for grower, again, same thing as when you use your backyard or shed. What exactly would a resident see when they look out of their shed, their backyard, or swimming pool? Use it.
the river. It would be a floodplain, it would be vegetated, it really might depend on where.
Go back to the primary towards the start.
Yeah.
That's conceptualizing what it looks like. It's going to be like a wall. If the driveway is up here, it's just down But in other words, it's like that kind of 8, 10 feet tall and then above the river. you lower it down to 4 feet or something like that. So their property would take it down, still be land that can be used for further things. But you're not going to go back and put like a shed down there now because it's subject to frequent flows.
Right, and if you wanted it to connect, on topsoil, you might use it.
So if you had a natural repair community, which would also soil tension,
This is odd, but like a flood.
And what trees grow in there though? I mean,
Yeah.
eventually-
Yeah, you
There's gonna be long
get
periods of time at times.
So ideally, you include a restoration plan with the grading work, so that their plantings are to be done in conjunction with the project to help kick it off. And then there may be the need to maintain things like invasive species and stuff, but we also do hoping for natural improvement of beneficial woody integration plants, stabilizing.
I'm sorry, I can't relate those, drawings similar to those, like a projected mock-up, would you do anything of those for alternative 2 and 3?
Oh, for the bridge retreat. No, this is conceptual actually from.
That's what I
before.
think.
This is-
Yeah, I'm having a hard time understanding the substantive difference between alternative 2 and 3.
Well, it's a little bit more subtle here when we're including all of the floodplains. It's tough to tell with this color scheme, but you might notice that the blues, sort of that boardwalk parking lot area, become a fair bit lighter with alternative 3. Versus alternative 2. So while the change in extent is a little bit more minor, the change in depth is up to a foot or 2 on the upstream side. And so that difference, I believe, might only affect 5. But maybe a bigger difference is that the alternative 3 bridge with these floodplains would actually, 3 bridges would clear it 5 which none of these others. So that's a pretty big thing, and that's beyond any of the design standards that we're seeking here. But that would be a substantive difference. Yeah.
Question, we can go back to
Okay.
if we were able to do the Simpson Park flood wedge, but not able to do the J Street flood wedge, do you know that that will allow that expanse or the bridge, it would be under your jurisdiction?
It's possible. So the tough part of that would be not having to raise the bridge so high that you have to extend the roadway grading far down in either direction that's affecting other properties. So losing that extra width, that calculus becomes tough, and then so maybe you have a multi-end bridge. Maybe, well, maybe not necessarily more expensive, but more long snagging. But you could get yourself up there, yeah, it might get you closer to needing a Yeah, so it's 4 parcels, but no. As
So, you know, building.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but the main strip is not the DOT strip, not so it requires coordination, DOT, and all that stuff.
and then, yeah.
You guys know the school, did you just want to be the access around the school, or did you carry that analysis somewhere? Or is it just?
Oh, no, it's all in there. So, there's a little bit of interdependence between the Romer Street and let's see if I can get there, at elementary school flood benches. So you can see some of the water that's pulled off 214 down there. That's actually coming from the Romer Street bench. So it's augments it somewhat like those do, but not, that's not.
It's not helping water, like.
No. Yeah, out of the channel, like the school's not. Yeah. But it almost immediately comes down the street, right? It's, so the school's right here, and this one gets out at that end, dumps out.
Anyone else have any questions? So it's a great modeling adventure. Well, we've been working on it for a couple of years and going through a lot of iterations, starting from the bridge and then going from there. What about the school, going up to 14, and understanding that we know that our bridges are too small. They create a lot of backwater from the flood. So our move from here is, when we decide on which bridge alternative to move to, and finding funding for that, and then finding funding for the flood benches wherever we're building land.
So the transfers are created down there by that 28 bridge, which is allowing all that soil to back up and be deposited. And it brings that ground-based separation we're looking for, probably, in my lifetime here, 15 feet higher by the soil. So what happens is when the confluence of the stone pole comes out into the surface creek, it hits that and it causes a back end basically, because if the creek is high, the water will get out and it backs right back up.
Right.
Because it won't let it out. Dan Davis was doing this with us, and we went down to his office. We shot elevations on that whole thing. We studied and done a lot of what we needed this, and it's created a lot of the problem. Yes, the bridge is too low now, but that's because it's back and all that filter back up to the mini or pictures. That's excavated when they leave that bridge, probably about 40 years ago. And I'm talking big excavations, we see some talk. Machines with the bucket around, probably 16, 18 feet high. So when they get that bridge, that's how much sediment is still in there. And that's coming back from the whole railroad companies. It's not allowed to hide the best. Let that stuff all fall out into the surface and get washed away. Because that water is built up higher and it's created a dam, which backs back up.
Yeah.
Well, that's the
Sediment and dynamics of confluence are always pretty tricky because it just doesn't really follow the typical pattern where you have like a single channel or things get cleaned out more frequently with different type of flow events. But as long as we've been looking at the stony surface confluence, it's been very dynamic, and it certainly has an issue like we identified with the 28 bridge that up here, this particular lane, and we in some of the lateral adjustment, I think, along the south or right bank, so, yeah.
Right, and some years or some events, we have more water coming down from the Stony Clove. Other events, there's not as much, and it's more coming on the surface.
Yeah, it really depends on how the water's in the watershed, and like where most of the rain's falling, whether it's like the surface part or something as well. And it's obviously going to affect how the sediment moves through the different parts of the section, sure.
Right. And this is what kind of what we were getting at here. It's not piecemeal to get there is okay, but it's that whole picture. Because usually that's where you get that element, you get it. Running on the street from Social Street, you get running on the street from Stony Clove. So, the process of addressing it, that small, you might get this first, and that later, think about that one down the road. But, it's a full blood.
Great, been very thorough. Yes.
About my situation. So this particular study was funded through a grant to the town, the Show Me and Washington Grant Program. And this is really the final product unless the town board has additional questions for SLR, unless you see any other solutions on it. So I'm looking to set like a time limit on people writing input or comments on that, because this will be the conclusion of the product, of this project with that mitigation. The second thing I just wanted to say, to take the town aware, is that if you would choose to remain part of this forward this time, do have a unique funding environment right now. The grant that is provided by the SCREAM program is New York City funds. New York City was asked by the counties in the past to set aside money for flood mitigation back in 2014. They have been required by regulators to continue funding flood mitigation in Catskills. So whether they like it or not, they have been setting aside millions of dollars to support the towns and communities these projects. And so that money is available right now. We all know that times are changing. We don't know how long those funds might be in place. So this could be the moment to move something forward if you had an interest in that. There's funding capacity management programs, there's some more funding capacity coalition to support that process. And in terms of phasing, this is discussed earlier, I don't know, with if we were to phases, which probably not have to be bridges, they'll have to go harder.
That's underway. So that's realistically probably going to happen. The soonest that doesn't mean that you're going to take it. I would have some of these take a while for various negotiations.
The Bridge Street Bridge project, that doesn't include floodplain requests, it's in the content of that.
Anybody else? We'll, I guess, maybe take 30 days for the town board to digest what is happening here and then we'll have the final.
Yeah, anything.
We'll talk more about it in our safari meeting and this Wednesday.